A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Well, let's get an update on this week's political agenda. Christopher Brohier is the Director of Policy and Research at the Australian Christian Lobby. Christopher, a special welcome back to 2020.
Thank you, Neil. It's good to be back.
Hey, Christopher, you've been taking a little time this past week, and I imagine there's real motive here, not just for the state of South Australia, but for anywhere that has the Greens as candidates for any of the upcoming elections. You've been what you're calling unmasking the Greens after an incident in South Australia. Give us your insights.
Yes, so last week there was a pamphlet distributed in one of the South Australian electorates by Greens volunteers, which was laden with expletives and basically was saying, bleep, the country's bleeped unless we change, the old men in suits are taking money, and we have to give, if you vote for us, we'll give you free education, free this, free that, basically a lot of money if you're on Centrelink, and then everybody will get a job if you want a job employed by the government. And it was called out on local radio in South Australia, and one of the Greens South Australian members backpedaled saying, look, that's not the way we do things in South Australia, and that may be, but it was authorised by somebody called Jay Mallop, who, if you do a Google search, you'll find that person works as in the Greens leader's office in Canberra. So this raises a number of issues. It shows the vulgarity that the Greens will descend to, but it's not just a vulgarity in terms of language used. Once you start peeling back what they're saying, it's an attack on people. It's attack, and these so-called policies are really clearly Marxist-based, and the whole gripe agenda of the pamphlet is Marxist-based. It says everything's bad, and the only way we can do it is to tear things down.
Now, they are backpedaling, though, aren't they? The Greens are saying this is not something that was officially organised. You mentioned a name there as the one who might have endorsed the particular flyer. But what you're saying here is they might be backpedaling, but hey, the flyer got out and it has an authorisation on it, and it probably does expose the Greens for who they truly are.
That's right. I think what people have to start really interrogating is, what are the Greens? Who are they? They're not what they were. They were a party of the environment back in the day, but now as you start to peel it back, it's a hard-edged Marxist agenda. There was another article carried by, I think, The Australian yesterday, or one of the news feeds, that there's a group in Tasmania that's explicitly saying Israel doesn't have a right to exist, and it's in their information they're saying they're going to meet in one of the Greens members' offices. So these are all these sorts of, and we know that the Greens have been very, very bad on Israel. So these are issues that a number of people who think the Greens are just, well, they're good for the environment. There are a lot of very concerning policies. For example, they stand for the decriminalisation for personal use of all drugs. That's on their platform. You can check it out. Now, that would be disastrous for Australia. The experiment's been tried in America, and what we had was, surprise, surprise, road deaths went up. Serious injuries went up. Surprisingly, the illegal drug trade went up. And once you start saying to people, well, you can take methamphetamine, then they're going to drive. And these are the issues, and we know that's happened in the ACT. So they're dead set against private education, particularly Christian education. They would love to see the end of it. So we have to start really understanding the agenda behind this party.
And it's interesting, isn't it? When you've got a flyer and you deliberately include a whole lot of expletives, things that ordinary people would cringe when they see those things, there is a certain element in the society, though, that thinks that's a good cutting-edge way of communicating and delivering the idea that this is all very serious and you've got to take notice of this. So it's interesting, isn't it, that you've got a flyer that is framed the way this one has been.
That's right, and it's deliberately painting a disaster view of the future, and that's just false. Australia's got significant problems, but if we turn, in biblical terms, repent and come back to the foundations, we've got lots of hope, and that's the message that people should be getting.
Let's come back to some of the things that you're saying here, Christopher. The thought that it's, very much a dishonest, toxic, Marxist core in the Greens. And some might be thinking, well, what makes a Marxist ideology so dramatic and so damaging? I wonder if you've got any thoughts here. You mentioned old blokes in suits as coming in for criticism. Is this a part of where you'd even start to look at the thought that this has got a Marxist foundation?
Well, yes, because that sounds a good slogan for a university students, old blokes in suits, okay? But hang on, let's interrogate it. Who are these old blokes in suits? They're the fathers. They're the people who worked hard to put some of the kids through universities. They're the people who built the universities. They're the people who help run the economy so that, by and large, it works. Just let me put this to you, Neil. I was visiting a friend of mine in hospital, and we were chatting. Australia has got a health system which, imperfect as it is, lots of problems, it's still, by and large, the best in the world, right? Yeah. And that's run by men in suits. So let's not be too arrogant and just dismiss older people. What we have in this country is because of older people. That's just one of the issues that once you start to interrogate these concepts, the way Marxism works is you set up something and you say it's got to be torn down and everything that exists is bad. It's got to be torn down, and this is the only way you can come right. Come to us, come to a situation where if you follow the sort of policies that were put up in that flyer, we'd all end up working for the government. We'd all be serfs, if you like, working for the government. And that's the way of disaster.
Okay, it's like a God-free ideology, Marxism. How do you manage culture and society if there is no God? And I guess that's sort of part of that foundation there. It's as you say, though, everybody works for the government and the promises of free everything. How do you make sense of where Greens might be sitting and the sorts of things, the policies that they're promoting in South Australia, and let's just assume this all everywhere around the country, this thought that, they're promising everything free?
Well, where does the money come from? The only way that you can do this is to tax more and more and more the working people. And the private sector, the wealth generation for our country, not that wealth is everything from a Christian point of view, but we need money to live. The wealth generation sector is shrinking and the public sector is growing. So if you keep taxing more and more, you end up coming to a position where you can't pay your promises. And the only way you can do it is to make things less and less. So everyone becomes poorer. And that's the core of Marxism is envy. These people have too much. So we'll make everyone poor. And that's the experience. Whenever this has been tried in the world, it's led to disaster. It's not some sort of experiment that might work. We know it doesn't work. You can just look at what happened in the Soviet Union, what happened in China. all those, whenever it's been tried, it ends up in disaster.
You might argue, Christopher, the exploitation of the gap that is developing between rich and poor. And a lot of people are noticing this, particularly young people. And as you say, young people, particularly open to this Greens message, the old blokes in suits, the envy of, they've got all that money. How do we get it, more equally distributed? But this gap between rich and poor, and that actually is something that people are noticing significantly right now. Does this play into the hands of people who want to promote a Marxist view?
I think it does. I think it does. But the answer is not to tear down everything. The answer is to take stock realistically of what God has given us in this country. And there's a verse from, I think it's Haggai chapter 2, it says, work. If the Greek migrants who came to this country back in the 50s, they worked 3 jobs. A friend of mine who's an Afghan gentleman who worked for the ADF, and then they brought him out because he would have been killed if he stayed there. He works 3 jobs at the moment. He's an engineer, he works in a supermarket, and he works in a cafe. So he can provide for his family, he can build a future for his family. And now that's tough, but he's doing it. And that's the sort of ethic that we need to have. There is a gap, there are disparities, there are inequalities, there's unfairness. But you don't fix it by tearing everything down. You fix it by building up.
Okay, let's move on. There's a whole bunch of things you've been thinking through in this past week, and you, just like so many other commentators, have been taken aback by some of the issues that have happened at the Paris Games. Obvious blasphemies when it comes to the depiction of the Last Supper, and the issues and the controversies around women. What's your overall view of what has been coming out of Paris?
So I think for me, and I love the Olympics, right? I really do. I love sport. But it's marred it for me because that opening ceremony was, and we all know it now, it was meant to be a parody of the Last Supper painting by Leonardo, which is in effect a parody of the Last Supper. And it's Martin Iles put out a little blog which was interesting on this. He said, the Last Supper shows, the real Last Supper, sacrifice of love. That's what it shows. This Last Supper, so-called, shows debauchery and lust as being magnified. And that's the issue that we have to choose as Western nations. Which way are we going to go? And I had a chance to speak on ABC Radio in Adelaide on this, and I said the Last Supper depicts John 3:16, that God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. And some things are too precious. That is too precious for anyone to attack it, anyone to sully it. And the fact that they did it just shows the debasement of Western society. Wendy Francis, in her media release, says Western culture is doomed. And unless we turn and repent, it is.
And there'll be a few eyes on that closing ceremony when it comes along, wondering whether there'll be any correction to that, because oftentimes closing ceremonies, it's a little bit like, the shackles are off. And and so my fears would be that France and their reputation is taking a sullying here too, because just the way that France is being portrayed because of these Olympics. Look, let's move on. You've got some meetings coming up in Tasmania, some important meetings, some changes that are happening in Tasmania. What's happening there?
Yeah, so we're going to Tassie today, and tomorrow at 7 p.m. at Legana Church in Legana, we're having a meeting for ACL supporters a mid-year update, and then on Thursday at 7 p.m. at Kingborough Family Church, KFC. You were there, I think.
Yes.
At KFC for the Tassie election.
Yep.
And one of the things, it's sort of a farewell trip for me because I'm resigning from ACL effective the 31st of August because I plan to seek nomination as the Family First candidate for the Senate for the next federal election. So it's a bit of a sad trip for me, but talked about some of the issues in Tassie, still the issue of this so-called conversion practices bill, which is really a coercive bill, and other issues. So we'll be providing an update and a bit of a reflection on the last few years.
Okay, so when are those meetings coming up in Tasmania? You're heading down there today?
Tomorrow at 7 p.m. That's Tuesday, 7 p.m., and then Thursday at 7 p.m. in Hobart in the Kingborough Family Church.
Okay.
Tomorrow is Launceston.
And you've got the north side of Tassie and the south side, two different meetings, delivering some real insights at those undoubtedly. And for listeners, you might want to check the ACL website to get an update. Hey, that's an interesting development that's happening career-wise for you. And 31st of August, your last day with the ACL, you're going to be a candidate for the Family First for the Senate for the next federal election. What is this all going to mean for you?
It's a bit nervous. I've never done it before, but also I'm looking forward to it. I guess, particularly since Lars Shelton became the National Director of Family First, I started thinking about this. Lars, a good friend of mine, and will be known to many of you or your listeners. And this is the substantial reason I think we need a policy-based, truth-influenced party on the right side of politics, advancing the cause of families. And to use the slogan, put your family first. On the right side of politics, there's more policy-based parties. One Nation's done a very good job. Pauline Hanson, lots of credits to her, but it's more centered around Pauline. We need a policy-based party to counteract the Greens. And so that's the long-term vision of this party.
It's 10 years or so that you've been with the ACL. Any particular memory that stands out? Any particular reflection of, particular things that you have been right there in the fray, rolling your sleeves up, getting involved in the battle? What comes to mind if you're reflecting on those past 10 years?
Well, the biggest thing that stands out is the marriage campaign, obviously, 2017. That was so sad that we lost that. But we said one of the things would be the weaponization of anti-discrimination legislation against Christians, prophecy fulfilled, and also the whole sex confusion thing, which we're facing now day to day. I got a call from somebody just last night whose child is wanting to become from a man to a girl. They're distraught. They don't know how to deal with it. The child is depressed. This is the outworking when we removed the sex issues from society. This is significantly bad. And so we've seen a decline, but we've also seen much hope. In South Australia, we managed to defeat the prostitution decrim. Unfortunately, we lost that in Queensland, and we're seeing some good things happening, some good legislation coming. So the issue really that we need to get through is this is the time that we as the followers of Jesus Christ must stand up and fight. When in one of the last scenes from The Lord of the Rings, when the Prince of Gondor and the armies of men are at the gates of Mordor, and he says, there may come a day when the sons of men will flee before evil, but it's not this day. There may come a day when we'll give in to the wolves and the scavengers, but it's not this day. This day we fight. And we fight with the weapons of truth, with the weapons of prayer, and with the weapon of sacrifice. That's our call, and that's what we have to do.
Well, Christopher, no doubt there'll be a lot of listeners who would be, cheering from the sidelines, giving you a pat on the back. 10 years with the Australian Christian Lobby, about to hang up the gloves there and put on a different set of gloves and pursue a political career and to be a candidate for the Senate in South Australia for Family First for the next federal election. So, Christopher, undoubtedly this won't be the last time we'll talk, but I want to thank you so much for, a great 10 years. We've done lots of updates at different times through that whole decade. But Christopher Brohier, and outgoing as the Director of Policy and Research at the Australian Christian Lobby. Christopher, thanks so much for your great contribution over the years, and we'll be talking to you in a different capacity perhaps sometime into the future. But thanks so much for your update today on 2020.
Thanks, Neil, and may I say support Vision. Vision's been great, and it's been great working with you. Thank you.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.